Hi everyone, I'm Mick Sass, Chief Inspector for the Recreation Vehicle Industry Association. I have been with RVIA since 1998 and have inspected production at all of our RVIA member manufacturing facilities throughout the United States and Canada during that time. I have to say that this is an amazing industry, one that we should all be very proud of. It is an industry that does an excellent job of regulating itself through phenomenal cooperation between our manufacturing members and our staff of professional inspectors. We also have many industry individuals very active and involved in the RVIA committees that work on codes and standards related issues. It is truly a team effort between the RV industry and RVIA in self-regulating itself. Today, I will be concentrating on how the purchasing and engineering departments should utilize the codes and standards that we build recreation vehicles to for coordination with the production line. We will also discuss how the sales department plays a role in this process and, of course, the major role that the production side of the industry contributes to the continued success of the RV industry. So at the outset, I must say that this presentation is based only on my experience inspecting production facilities for RVIA over the past 23 years. However, my perception of the process upstream from the production line is pieced together from short visits to a multitude of different companies over those years. My perception blends everything from the very large companies with an entire second floor filled with cubicles and their engineers, accountants, and purchasing agents, all the way down to the smallest and modest mom and pop shops where talking to all of those departments means talking to only one or two people in total. Now, what I want to stress is that no matter how your company is structured, or how big or small it presently is, it doesn't really matter. Quality RVs can be produced. In my opinion, this is because with most RVIA manufacturing members, the company is working very closely with RVIA and the standard department as partners. The company is doing their very best to meet all code requirements. And from the codes and standards viewpoint, I do see quality products being produced. That cooperation and teamwork is a huge benefit of being a manufacturing member of RVIA. Let's keep up the good work and keep improving. Now let's get started where the whole process begins, sales. Salespeople, as a general rule, are not aware of the requirements of the codes and standards that guide our industry in manufacturing safe, dependable RVs. Not that they should be, although it would be helpful to those of us downstream in the production line. We will discuss what those codes and standards are in a bit. So my perception is that when sales sees new components that would enhance the RVs that they sell, they push those ideas onto the people in the purchasing and engineering departments. Now, purchasing will research the options in that relevant market. Say it's propane appliances or the latest in electronic gadgets that may improve their sales. Now the engineering department will be handed the new component and they will need to evaluate it and know what is required by the codes and standards in order to safely and properly install the new component. Again, remember, this is my perception of how the process works. Finally, production will build the new RV with the new components based on code requirements and the specific installation instructions provided with that new component. This is a very simplified explanation as to how the RV is updated with new components when manufactured. I also understand that this sequence of events in the production process will vary widely between the larger and smaller manufacturers. However, any individual involved in design, purchasing, planning, and production of RVs should have a basic understanding of the codes and standards that we build the RVs to. As stated earlier, we are concentrating on purchasing and engineering and the need to be aware of the codes and standards we utilize to build RVs. I'm not saying that purchasing needs to know all the details in the standards, but there are some they should know, and the rest should still be in the back of their minds and available to them in their office as reference materials. It is assumed that many of those doing engineering and design within the industry already have a good working knowledge of the codes and standards. It is also assumed that those in supervisory roles at the production facilities have a good working knowledge of the codes and standards. Knowing the codes and standards may be less true for the new engineers and new supervisory personnel on the production line, as well as for those in the purchasing department. For all those individuals working in the RV industry, knowing the basics of what codes and standards are and what they do for the industry will help in the coordination of new RVs, starting from the wishes of the sales department through the design and engineering and culminating in the production of a quality RV. So, as sales personnel see the market changing, they request new items and components to add to the RVs that they feel will increase sales. This, in some cases, can lead to unnecessary deviations being found during an RVIA inspection. Most of these could be avoided if there were more coordination between all the groups in the RV industry. If an item is researched by the purchasing and engineering department prior to sending it to production line, the deviation would not have been there for us to find. Next, the purchasing personnel do their best to meet the needs of the sales department requests. Admittedly, sales keeps most industries growing, including the RV industry. However, there are times when sales personnel want a component that is based on product that they see on other RVs, or from other vendors, or from a booth at a trade show. These problems sometimes arise from the vendors and the non-RVIA member manufacturers displaying their products that don't meet all the codes and standards that we are concerned with in this presentation. They just assume that if it is at a trade show, that it is built to code, just as RVIA member manufacturers build their RVs. But that's simply not the case. If it is not an RVIA manufacturing member, it is likely that there are more code deviations based on their lack of oversight from RVIA. Over the years, it has been amazing to see some of the third-party agencies that perform RV inspections and the number of deviations from the standard that they simply miss. Next, engineering will design and engineer the RVs to integrate the requested items into the new model RVs. The engineering department should always be knowledgeable of the listing requirements and the installation requirements provided within that listing. Engineering should always contact sales if and when an item that is to be installed in a new model RV does not meet the required standards or will be impossible or impractical to install. This is probably done quite frequently, but does get missed from time to time. As inspectors, we see each production facility on an average of every 8 weeks or 6 times a year. We inspect to the standards we will be discussing shortly, and it does include all aspects of the standards on every inspection. We also, as an inspection staff for RVIA, rotate our inspection staff to achieve well-rounded inspections, usually using the 6 inspectors that we have presently. Again, we have 2 stopgaps to avoid being cited by RVIA in-plant inspections, the purchasing and the engineering stopgaps. The final chance to catch deviations is the frontline supervision on the assembly line. Now it's in the hands of the production facility to build the new models and integrate the new features into the RVs. This is the last line of defense prior to an RVIA production line inspection. Plant managers and production line supervisors are generally very well versed with the codes and standards that apply to manufacturing RVs that we are producing. The production personnel should be involved in the review of prototypes, and they usually are. Just like having RVIA inspectors rotating through our inspections, having more eyes on a new prototype is the best way to assure that nothing is missed before it goes into production. This will go a long way in avoiding more codes and standard issues when the new models are inspected. So, what are the codes and standards for those of you that are not familiar with them? The standard is the document. It contains a compilation of codes which are simply rules to which we build RVs. Which standards apply to the RV industry? There are 4 standards that the RV industry designs and builds RVs around. The first is the NFPA 1192, Standard on Recreational Vehicles. This standard contains the codes or rules that we must comply with as manufacturing members of RVIA. The codes cover 8 chapters covering fuel systems and equipment, fire and life safety, plumbing systems, and vehicular requirements. The remaining chapters supplement these chapters along with an appendix. What code should purchasing and engineering people know? The first and the easiest to detail is the engineering personnel. They should be knowledgeable of all of it. The purchasing personnel would benefit from a solid working knowledge of all the codes, but knowing how to install a wire nut may not be that necessary for them. However, knowing about the listing requirements is a very important portion of the codes and vital in purchasing materials and components for the production process. Next is the NFPA 70, or more commonly referred to as the NEC or National Electric Code. This document covers all aspects of the 120-volt electrical systems under Section 551 for RVs and Section 552 for park model RVs. Having a full copy of the NEC is vital and a requirement at each production facility or campus. Additionally, although we do not inspect for it or require it as manufacturing members, all these documents should be on hand in every engineering department for obvious reasons. Distribution panel boards, inverters, converters, transfer switches, and all electrical wiring and devices are covered in these sections of the NEC. However, you will see that both sections 551 for RVs and 552 for PMRVs are relatively short in comparison to the overall size of the NEC document. Both the RV and the PMRV sections of the NEC will frequently reference other sections of the NEC for more clarification. This makes having the full copy of the NEC available to each production facility a necessity. Again, although not a requirement of having it in the engineering department, it sure makes a lot of sense. Note that these two documents are both NFPA documents, National Fire Protection Agency documents. As NFPA documents, they are organized with reference numbers only using decimal points. A typical reference number would be 551.60, which references the testing requirements of the 120-volt electrical systems. Next is the ANSI RVIA low volt standard. ANSI is the American National Standards Institute. This document is maintained by RVIA as we are an ASD, or an accredited standards developer for ANSI, thus the ANSI RVIA title. As the title indicates, it covers the codes related to everything in the low-volt electrical system of RVs. The document's title also indicates that it applies to conversion vans and other vehicles, but is exclusively dedicated today to RVs. The inspection staff of RVIA in the past inspected the conversion van industry along with the RV industry. This also explains the document's title. Now, this being an ANSI document, its numbering system is slightly different. ANSI documents employ both dashes and decimal points, as seen in this example concerning stacking of terminal ends on posts or studs. 6-1.14 represents 6 being the chapter, followed by a dash, then subsequent paragraphs and sentences, all using decimal points. The final document we utilize to maintain compliance with standards is the ANSI A119.5 standard for park model RVs. To a great extent, this document mirrors the 1192 in content. Additional construction requirements are specified in Chapter 5 of this document, and note that there is not a construction chapter in the 1192 RV standard. You will also note that both of these last two documents are ANSI documents. For that reason, you will see the numbering for the specific code requirements are written as those of an ANSI document, such as the 12-volt standard that we just discussed. So, exactly like the examples shown in the 12-volt standard, dashes and decimal points are employed in the numbering system. In addition to these 4 documents, RVIA produces and maintains handbooks that further detail the standards documents. Both provide more information that removes the gray area from the standards by providing drawings, photographs, charts, and illustrations. These are large 3-ring binder documents that are subscriptions and last for the duration of a code cycle, which is usually a 3-year period. During that 3 years, updates to the code will be provided with new pages being distributed to replace outdated material or to add as new requirements that have been adopted. I would recommend that these and a full set of standards be maintained in both the engineering and purchasing departments for reference purposes. They will be of great value, especially during new model year changes and during the design process. At this point, I again will say that these documents are vital in both the engineering and purchasing departments to assure that the coordination between the different departments is as seamless as possible. I will not get into detailed discussion on all the specific codes during this presentation, but will concentrate on the big picture in coordination between the departments involving codes related to listing requirements. I also encourage both departments to utilize our inspection staff and the standards departments for questions anytime that they arise. Our inspection department, unlike other third-party inspection agencies, do nothing but recreation vehicle inspections. We also need to stress that inspections are not to be viewed as policing efforts. Inspections are an educational tool that we provide as a part of the RV industry's team, and it helps maintain and improve our product and protect our overall industry. As a group, the inspection department is led by Kurt Richardson. He's the director of inspection services. He and his staff can and will work with you on answering any technical concerns that you may have that relate to listing issues. So, where do you obtain these documents? Simply contact either office listed here or order at our website. All these documents are available through RVIA except for the NEC, which can be purchased through the NFPA website or at any major bookseller. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we will only concentrate on one overall subject that needs the most coordination between purchasing, engineering, and production. That, in my opinion, is recognizing listed components in the production of RVs. In the United States, many products need to be called listed. Listings are the documents that provide the evaluation for the product for construction, use, and in many cases for installation requirements and instructions. Listings in the United States must be provided by a third-party agency. This meaning that a non-partial evaluation of the project is performed to a specific standard and cannot be done by the company manufacturing the product. Above, you see examples of some of the listing marks for most of the listing agencies that RVIA has approved and have maintained their required documentation with RVIA as approved third-party listing agencies. In December of this year, 2021, this list will have been freshly updated with 16 agencies. This group of approved third-party listing agents will be current for the next 3 years. There is one mark commonly seen on many products throughout our industry and many others, the CE mark. Now, the CE mark is not a third-party listing agency. It is a mark of compliance that can be placed on any product by the manufacturer themselves, stating that they, as the manufacturers, have produced the product to the standard that applies to it specifically. Some people would like to kid around saying that this means China export, as it seems that everything is made there. Although a large portion of the products we use in the industry do come from China, the CE mark is seen on many items produced throughout the world. Many of those products also have proper third-party listings on them in addition to the CE mark. It actually is a mark of compliance for European countries. For that reason, not because it's true, but because the acronym is French, I remember it as Compliance Europe. The bottom line is that the CE mark by itself is not sufficient as a standalone listing. If another listing agency recognized by RVIA, as seen in the prior slide, is also associated with the product containing a CE mark, and marked properly on the component or product, it will be acceptable, but again, not if only the CE mark is present. As purchasing or engineering personnel, knowing which agencies are recognized by RVIA is important to know. So, where do you find this information? At the RVIA website, of course. First, go to the RVIA website at www.rvia.org. Then, sign in there or register and follow the steps. Now, click on Standards and Regulations in the blue bar at the top of the page. Then, scroll down to the bucket labeled Recognized Listing Agencies. There you will find several pages containing the names and contact information to all the RVIA recognized third-party listing agencies. So let's look at some of the commonly listed components found in RVs. As mentioned earlier, listings also include their specific uses and installation instructions. Knowing what a component's intended purpose is and how they are to be installed are both covered by the listing and are vital for both engineering and purchasing in making their decisions. 120-volt electrical is generally covered by listings through Underwriter Laboratories, UL. For RVs and for park models, almost everything in the 120-volt system needs to be listed. There are several listing agencies besides UL that provide listings for the 120-volt electrical equipment and materials. UL and other listing agencies list many other products, including specific components for the 12-volt electrical systems. But as a purchasing agent, it should be noted that in the 12-volt electrical system, not everything needs to be listed. However, there are items such as light switches that need to be rated for the capacities but do not need a full listing. Now, for gas and fuel burning appliances and equipment, there are several agencies that provide these listings. In general, it's important to remember that almost everything involved in a propane or a natural gas system will need to be listed, and they need to be specifically listed as fuel burning appliances and equipment for use in an RV. Now, this is also true for the components of the propane and fuel supplied equipment. The hoses and fittings and the regulators that supply gas to the appliances must also be listed. Again, UL, Underwriter Laboratories, also covers these items, but there are other agencies that list propane equipment and their components. Also, listed assemblies that are purchased, which are comprised of 2 or more components, will have a duration that the listing is valid for. Here's an example of a distribution manifold and hoses listed as an assembly. The important point here is to remember that there is a life to a listed assembly. This is typically a 3 to 5 year period. At that time, the listing needs to be reevaluated and the listing updated as required by the agency. If the listing lapses and the RVIA inspection staff finds an out-of-date listed assembly, they will cite it as a deviation while inspecting the assembly line. So just remember that almost all components of the 120-volt electrical system, the propane system, and additionally, the plumbing system will require listings. Again, there are several agencies providing listing services for plumbing components. Also, the majority of components in both the water supply side and the drainage side of plumbing do need to be listed. As with many of the components seen here in plumbing, fuel systems, and electrical, specific listings may also be required. For example, piping involved with the drainage system must be listed DWV or drain, waste, and vent. Piping for the water supply must be listed as non-toxic, and so on. Now, when it comes to fire life safety, we as inspectors concentrate on several items. When it comes to the listings, we are looking for specific listings for carbon monoxide, smoke, and propane detectors. For example, smoke detectors need to be listed to UL 217 and specifically suitable for use in recreational vehicles. If you purchase a smoke detector that is listed UL 217 at a Lowe's or a Home Depot, but it does not have the additional language for use in recreational vehicles, it is not the correct smoke detector and it will be cited as a deviation during an RVIA inspection. UL 217 does have at least 2 variations. one being for residential use and the other specifically for RVs. Propane detectors need to be listed under UL 1484 standard. It also needs to contain the language that it is specifically for use in RVs. And finally, carbon monoxide or CO detectors must be listed to UL 2034. The common thread between all these safety devices is that they must indicate that they are suitable for use in recreational vehicles or use similar language. These detectors may not be necessarily found in a Lowe's or a Home Depot or any other hardware store. They may have the proper UL listing number, but they do not have the accompanying language for RV use, and they are not correct and will be cited as a deviation from the code. As stated earlier, listings here in the United States are evaluations of products by a third-party agency, not by the manufacturing company itself. Additionally, RVIA recognizes only about 16 of these agencies at this time. Again, this list can be found at our RVIA website. We covered CE marks, which are very common globally, but not accepted in the US unless it is accompanied by a listing from a third-party agency recognized by RVIA. So, why do we have listings on products? Most listed products incorporate some type of installation instructions and instructions for use with the product. For our purposes as manufacturers and for our inspection staff, the installation instructions are the most important portion of the listing. Installation and/or use instructions are provided with each product. Also, in today's world, the company may also provide these installation and use instructions online. For sales, purchasing, and production personnel, it is important that everyone read and understand the installation instructions. Why? Installation instructions provide the information needed to produce a safe, reliable, and quality RV. We all know how litigious our society has become and that anyone can file a lawsuit for practically any reason. I personally believe and hope that all manufacturers want to do the right thing and obviously would never intentionally produce a dangerous product. However, we know that lawsuits do arise for a variety of reasons. We can spread this legal risk by understanding that installation instructions and following them to the letter is very important. This is why we as manufacturers take one card off the table that could be used for a lawsuit if it is installed properly according to the installation instructions. As we just discussed, proper installation based on the installation instructions found within the listing is vital. This insulates us, the manufacturer, to some degree and spreads the risk to the listing agency as well as the product manufacturer. After all, lawyers will always go after the deepest pockets, the groups with the largest bank accounts. This brings me to another point concerning the installation instructions. You will find that some installation instructions may not be as comprehensive as you would expect, leaving gray areas on how the component or device is to be installed. In many cases, the codes and standards that we use to build RVs is your next line of defense. When evaluating a new component, no matter what it is, electrical or an appliance, plumbing or safety equipment, always compare and utilize both the manufacturer's installation instructions and all codes pertaining to that particular component. Just remember that manufacturing installation instructions are what was evaluated by the third-party listing agency and should be followed to the letter. Knowing the installation requirements by purchasing and engineering is vital to minimize delays in design and production. This does two things for you. First, it will bring to your attention any physical problems in installing the device or component based on the required clearances, securement, and other factors depending on what the item might be. Two, it will also compare the difference between the installation instructions and the applicable codes and standards that we need to meet. One more important point that we must discuss on decision making when it comes to purchasing any component. A listed product's installation instruction will take precedence over the codes and standards because it has been listed for installation in the manner detailed by the manufacturing listed installation instructions. Now, take for example a generator installation. Say it is made by a reputable company and meets all the power requirements that are requested by the sales department. The generator's installation instructions can meet all space requirements, securement, and grounding requirements as dictated in the installation instructions and the NEC codes. However, with all looking good for a seamless installation, we find that one code requirement is not going to be met. The proper listing, and again here, all generators need to be specifically evaluated and listed for use in recreational vehicles and clearly stated somewhere in print on the generator. There are generators that could probably do the job, but since it is on an RV, vibration and other factors need to be evaluated, and the listing must specifically say for RV use. And finally, based on a lot of our own experience with Hurricane Katrina years ago, reporting of defects and dangerous situations on RVs has become a much larger concern. We in the Standards Department keep an eye on the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's NHTSA reports or recall reports and review them twice a year at our semi-annual inspectors meetings. Greg Wishmeyer, Chief Inspector, monitors the NHTSA reports and also alerts the inspection staff when serious issues arise between the meetings. For those involved in the recall reports at the manufacturing level, you know there is a lot of time and money spent to clear these up with the federal government. All of you in purchasing and engineering departments, as well as those on the production line, should always be aware of the listings and code requirements for all components being installed in the RVs so that a recall is not based on faulty installation. Evaluating these listed installation instructions is the first step in sending new units to the production line and the first step in avoiding unnecessary NHTSA reporting. Now, for those in purchasing, and maybe to some extent for those new to the engineering department, it is also important that you understand the structure of RVIA inspections and how the deviations or mistakes are labeled. Manufacturing members of RVIA are inspected unannounced 6 times each year at each production line. And as a rough number, each year we as RVIA inspectors perform over 2,000 individual inspections. Here is what we see in an inspection report detailing several deviations made by manufacturers. Let's look at what appears on a RVIA inspection report and briefly explain the structures of that report. Seen here is a park model RV inspection report. Both The RV and this PMRV report are formatted in the same way. Let me detail this. First, the title block provides the RV manufacturer's name and general address in the form of city and state. Second are the dates of the past two inspection reports. This is very important to know, as repeated deviations are based only on the past two inspections, which covers approximately a 16-week period. This now provides our manufacturing members of RVIA 6 inspections on a yearly basis that roll over year to year, meaning that we do not start the new year with a fresh slate. The prior two inspections from September through December will be used for the January inspection and so forth. In reality, the time between inspections can be more or less than 2 months based on other obligations of the inspection staff. Overall, we generally don't go closer than 6 weeks apart and further out than 10 weeks. Additionally, in order to provide a balanced and comprehensive inspection program, we rotate our inspection staff so that we do not use the same inspector from one inspection to the next. This date is the current inspection date. When submitted to the RVIA database, it will push the prior inspection number 1 down to prior inspection number 2. And inspection number 2 will fall off the prior inspection list and not be counted for prior deviations in the next inspection visit. The product field typically will have a TT for travel trailer or FW for fifth wheels on many of our RV manufacturers. This is a travel trailer on a report as seen to the far right and marked TT. Other facilities may have SUT for sport utility trailer, or HT for horse trailer, or MA for A-class motorhomes, MB for B-class motorhomes, and MC for C-class motorhomes. In all instances, a repeated deviation can be cited on different types of RV as long as they are produced on the same production line and found in the last two inspection reports. The seals used field indicates that the manufacturer was applying an RVIA seal on all the RVs being produced. This field on normal reports will say yes. Here you see it indicating NA or not applicable because it's a pending member inspection. Pending member inspections are as the name suggests. The inspection performed prior to becoming a member of RVIA as a manufacturer of RVs. Now, each RV being produced by RVIA manufacturing members are required to display a seal with a seal number that is tracked by RVIA in order to determine the productivity of our industry. Quarterly reports are generated from these seal sales, and the serials numbers are used to track the number of units being built each quarter. Seen on the left side of the screen are RV and PMRV seals. These are the numbers recorded in this field of the title block. The status field indicates to the inspector if the facility is currently active, inactive, or possibly on probation. And finally, the response letter date field. This field will normally be blank as it is used only when a response letter is required back from the manufacturing facility. When it is filled in, it will be a date 10 working days out from the inspection found at the top of this information block. Response letters are sent out when deviations are serious enough or repeated one or more times, depending on the classification of the deviation. So here we are, the types of deviations. Let's start with the least serious of the three classifications of deviations, A, B, and C class deviations. The C class deviation is the least serious. C class deviations are simply represented as shown here with the appropriate code number reference. In this report, the first 3 deviations and a couple more seen here in the report are all C-class deviations. These deviations are non-life-threatening and generally considered more of a nuisance deviation. They could be cited on 3 consecutive inspection reports before a response letter from the RV manufacturer would be necessary. The same deviation on a 3rd consecutive report will require a response letter from the manufacturer explaining the reasons for the deviation and why during that time it had not been corrected. In addition, an explanation of how they will keep this from happening in the future must be part of the response letter. Next are the B-class deviations. Yet not the most serious deviation. There is no response letter required until it is a repeated deviation. B-class deviations are designated with a circle as seen here, with 3 B-class deviations seen on this report. Lastly, the most serious of the deviations, the A-class deviation. When an A-class deviation is cited on a report, it will require a response letter. This again means that the first time an A-class deviation is found, it must be responded to in writing from the manufacturing member. Now the numbers circled here to the right of the code reference numbers are the subcategory numbers for that specific deviation. Any specific deviation can have multiple subcategories. This helps to differentiate the small caveats to a deviation without creating repeated deviations under the same code reference number. Take, for example, 551.40a. It's the 3rd deviation from the bottom of this report. There are at least 9 different subcategories, and this happens to be number 9. Here, the manufacturer was cited for a main panel board breaker not having a secondary hold down. Next to the column with the subcategories is the description of the deviation. And the last column on the far right is the type of vehicle the deviation was found on. At the top left corner of an inspection report is one of 2 seals found on the RVs that we inspect. The first is an oval shape and is applied to all RVs. These can be silver in color for towable units, white for tent campers and truck campers, and gold for all motorized RVs. The second is a round seal for the park model RVs. You will see that each of these seals have numbers on them. Again, these numbers are for tracking the number of RVs being produced on a quarterly basis. So the takeaway from this portion of the presentation is that the inspection program through RVIA is in place to promote the production of safe, quality RVs. In doing so, we as an industry will continue to remain self-regulating with as little intervention from the government as possible. So to review our inspection reports, on the right we see a standard RV inspection report. It contains a C-class and an A-class deviation, both found on travel trailers. Here in the information block of the report, the product could be either a travel trailer or a fifth wheel. It shows that serial numbers were used, and it shows the number of the RVIA seal. It also shows that it is a manufacturing member in good standings and active within our system. And finally, the date that the A-class deviation needs to be responded by, December 1st of 2021. Now, let's get back to listings again, but in a bit more detail. How do you determine if a component or device is listed? Most components of a plumbing system need to be listed and marked according to the listing requirements. Here is a typical sticker for plumbing that includes both the CSA and IAPMO listing marks. These marks may be installed in many ways, but if required by the listing, they must be marked on the component. In the plumbing portion of the listings, these markings may be embossed in the plastic of a holding tank or etched into the material, or as seen here, marked with a sticker. In the 120 volt electrical systems, again, most components need to be listed and some marked with specific caveats such as listed for recreational vehicles or the equivalent language. On some components within an RV, listings are only required to be on the installation instructions or supplied with the packaging. But again, here's an example of a range top instruction manual. The listing must also be specifically for use with recreational vehicles. Now, depending on the standard being applied, specific markings directly on a component or material may be required. This may also require language specifying that it is specifically listed for recreational vehicles. Here, we see that these propane hoses are both marked with a tag and with embossed information directly on the hose itself. Another note we can make here is the backward UR mark embossed on the hose. This mark by itself is not adequate as a listing. However, CSA has also been stamped on the hose, and this mark alone, without the white tag, would be adequate. The backward UR is a UL mark basically meaning that it has been partially listed and can be used as a part of a listed product. For example, a multi-wire terminal or a quick connect having a backward UR mark is used as part of a listed inverter or converter. The quick connect cannot be used independently to connect 120 volt wiring. Then, when necessary, going to the web may be your last resort. There, you can visit the website of the component manufacturer and look into the proper listing information you are after. Remember, however, that most listings will require a physical marking on the listing of a component or device. Research the product at their specific website. Look for the product specifications and always remember that many products need to be marked on the component itself and that it requires additional markings such as for use in recreational or land vehicles. In many cases, the marking that is placed on the component will also display the standard that it was listed to. Here are some examples. Heat ducting needs to be either a class 0 or class 1 and is clearly marked here on this insulated ducting. At the bottom of the photo, it states the standard to which it was evaluated, UL standard 181. Detectors have all different standards to which they are evaluated, and again, they all need to state that they are intended for use in RVs. Now, electrical appliances all need to be listed and marked. We, as an inspection staff, do not need to know the specific standard they are listed under. Simply seeing the RVIA recognized listing agency mark on the appliance or in the installation instructions will be adequate. Plumbing components all need listings from piping and hose to fixtures and fittings. Here we see an example of ABS drain pipe which has the listing mark on the pipe with the specific designation of DWV, drain, waste, and vent. And the list continues, many more than we have time to discuss here today. Here is a water supply connection listed properly as non-toxic and able to distribute water at all temperatures up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. This is what the TS25 marking indicates. Listed components and devices, as mentioned earlier, do not necessarily need to indicate which standard they are evaluated to, but simply need to show the RVIA recognized listing agency mark. One example would be fire extinguishers, which need to be listed and labeled to UL 711. Inspectors will look for the listing agency mark, but are more interested here that it is the correct type of fire extinguisher. As of July 2021, the RV industry adopted the use of 1A 10BC fire extinguishers. This is a change from the past 20 plus years, when a 5BC or a 10BC extinguisher was required depending on the type of RV in question. For the most part, the RVIA inspection staff will ask for installation instructions when a new product or appliance is introduced to the RV production line that they are inspecting. As mentioned earlier, everyone needs to be familiar with these instructions, including the inspectors from the standards department here at RVIA. We will ask from time to time to see the installation instructions for a particular appliance. We are mainly interested in comparing the installation instructions to the appliances we see already installed on the production line. Let's take washers and dryers for example. In most cases, a washer and dryer will be installed in an alcove or a closet in an RV. When this is seen by the inspector, the first question that comes to mind is there adequate ventilation for the dryer? Installation instructions for dryers, as with many appliances, will change over time, so we ask to see the installation instructions for dryers being inspected at that time. We also see new dryers being introduced into the industry that we are not familiar with and need to learn about how they are to be installed. When dryers are installed in an enclosed location of an RV, such as a closet or an alcove, the installation instructions may mandate clearances and ventilation requirements. We, as inspectors, utilizing the code found here under the NEC standard 551.40B, to verify that all products shall be used only in a manner in which they have been tested and found suitable for the intended use. For everyone involved in designing of the RV through the production line workers, this means that you should install as the listing requires and that the product should never be altered from its original listed configuration. It is a deviation and could provide a path to lawsuits if alterations to a component is found to be the cause of a litigation. So we regularly ask for installation instructions that must be supplied with the appliance and provided to the owner of this RV when it is sold. Installation instructions provide the inspectors, engineers, and purchasing agents the necessary information to determine everything we generally need to know. In this section of the installation instructions, a clear illustration of required clearances and ventilation dimensions are provided. But remember, it is also important to read the bullet points as well. There are key words that make a big difference. In the top bullet point, it states that a minimum size opening is required. This means that it's a must-do for the appliance, whatever it may be, to operate properly and safely. In installation instructions, as well in code language, words matter. Words like shall, must, required, and so on are all statements mandating something specific to be done or occur. Words like recommended, may, or could are viewed as suggestions to the statement and don't have to be done. They are not required. In this example, ventilation requirements are also provided. However, there's a major difference between this example and the prior installation instructions example. In this example, the important word to note is recommended. This allows the installer to go with less ventilation if necessary for whatever reason it might be. Because it is only recommended, it is not mandatory ventilation and can be altered or even ignored. However, if ventilation is mentioned in the installation instructions, ignoring or severely limiting the volume of ventilation could lead to poor dryer performance and customers not being happy with their RV. When instruction installations mandate that a specific amount of ventilation be provided, then the size of the openings in the door will be calculated by the inspection staff to verify again that it meets the requirements of the installation instructions. Also, in order to do this, consideration of the grating or screens placed over the openings for aesthetic values must be taken into account. On page H-67 of the 1192 handbook, this example of screens is provided showing the free air provided. So the inspector will measure the opening. He will then determine which screen is similar to or matches the screen to be used. He then will multiply the square inches of the openings by the percentage of the open air the screen provides, seen here from the handbook as providing 44 inches of free air. This illustration in figure 5.4.5 can be used to estimate the free air opening and thus coming close to the minimum free air opening required for the dryer. Now, if there's not a screen example in this group that is close to the screen you wish to utilize, information on the percentage of free air designed into the screen can be obtained from the manufacturer of the screen. Again, for those of you not familiar with the RVIA inspection process, this is a relatively common practice. Many times, it is simply a function of slats for ventilation. Then, the number of openings between slats multiplied by the square inches of each of the openings to determine if there is enough ventilation. As we've mentioned, listings are required in many components of RVs and park model RVs. For example, here we show a code reference 5.4.1 from the 1192 standard for RVs. Again, much of the park model RV standard A119.5 mirrors the standards for RV, which should be helpful to those companies producing both products. However, always take the time to compare the associated codes, as not all corresponding code references between the two documents have the same exact language. Today, in this portion of the presentation, we will take a sampling of code references from the NFPA 1192 standard for RVs to point out where in the standard listing requirements are mandated. In this example, I am pointing out that listings for propane appliances are required to be specifically for use in RVs. The reference circled here in red, 5.4.1, states that fuel burning appliances and vents necessary for their installation shall be listed for installation in recreational vehicles. This requirement is found in both RV and PMRV standards, but with slightly different language. So in this case, the same basic requirement remains the same, except that fuel burning appliances listed for manufactured homes, mobile homes, are permitted to be used in park model RVs, but they are not listed to be installed in a standard RV. Now, standard RV appliances are permitted to be in park model RVs. This is seen underlined in red below in the 2-6.1.1 code reference from the ANSI A1195 standard on park model RVs. This can be important to manufacturers of park models as it expands the type and or style of ovens and cooktops available for park model RVs. So, keeping in mind that for the sake of time, and even though I know you love listening to my voice, we will just concentrate on the RV standard and the listing requirements found there. So, keeping with specific requirements for listings, let's hit some that are common in the 120 volt electrical systems under the National Electric Code. A specific UL 458 listing is required for inverters and converters. It may not state UL 458 on the device or in the installation instructions, however. It may also just say, for use in recreational vehicles or intended for land vehicles. All are acceptable and meet the requirements of UL 458. Inspectors that do not find any of the three markings on the device or its package will cite it as need to provide evidence of listing for UL 458. When RVIA inspectors inspect RVs that have an onboard generator as a secondary electrical power source, they often will also be equipped with an automatic transfer switch, or an ATS. These also require a specific listing, which is also to be printed on the device, UL 1008. Another issue that crops up from time to time is the use of the proper wiring within the 120 volt electrical system. Wires or conductors, also referred to generically as Romex, which is a brand name, it is actually a non-metallic sheath cable that comes in many configurations. These configurations vary in the size of the wire, the type of wire material, the physical construction of the wire, and also in different insulations and different sheathings. And among others, and the most important to us today, is that what their intended use is under their individual listings. This photo shows three different sizes of Romex, which again is technically non-metallic sheath cable. Romex is much easier to say. The size of each cable is clearly visible to any observer based on the colors alone. However, they additionally are required to be clearly marked with the pertinent information about the configuration and content housed within the exterior sheathing. Orange sheathing indicates a 10-gauge wire containing two 10-gauge insulated conductors and a bare 10-gauge ground wire. Yellow sheathing also contains a bare ground wire and two insulated conductors, all 12-gauge copper wire. And the white sheathing as well contains three 14-gauge wires, one being the ground wire that's bare, and all are protected within the white sheathing. All these cables have conductors and ground wires that are solid copper wire and are present in the 30 amp 120 volt electrical systems. In a 50 amp electrical system, the RV industry utilizes Romex containing 4 wires for the power cord connection to the distribution panel board area. A 50 amp system requires 2 hot conductors along with a neutral conductor and the bare ground. Again, all utilize solid copper wire and seen only between the distribution panel board and the power connection at the RV park. All of these cables are the most common cables used in the RV industry, and they all need to be listed. Listings in this case assure us that the size of the wire is adequate to handle the amps the cable was designed to carry. It also assures us that the proper insulation is used on the copper conductors and that the sheathing is the correct type for its intended purpose. The takeaway here being that the use of listed components such as Romex, we can be assured that the components are built properly and are safe to use for their intended purpose. Now, the photo on the right is another typical 120 volt cable we find in the RV industry. These are typically the SJ or SO cables that are listed specifically for rough usage and exterior installation. Again, the NEC under 551 and 552 sections for RVs and PMRVs require listed wires with the proper requirements for rough use for exterior installation. These cables and others meet those requirements. Their construction is based on their use. SJ cable is intended for both external use and rough usage because it is a stranded wire and has a special sheathing that is much more resilient than the standard non-metallic sheathing. The problem that shows up occasionally is that the SJ cable is being used as a fixed in place wiring that it is not intended for. Since it is constructed of a stranded wire, much more flexibility is provided in the cable. It is used for RV slide outs and other movable components of an RV that require the flexibility. So it cannot be used for fixed in place applications. That is what Romex cable is for. As mentioned earlier, Romex is a solid copper wire, which is not flexible and does not hold up well under repeated bending. Now granted, the SJ cable would be fine in a fixed in place situation if it was listed providing that option to do both, but it is not. So even though it would definitely be safe and durable, we would cite it as a deviation from the code. And additionally, the SJ cable is considerably more expensive than Romex, so it is cheaper to transition from SJ to Romex as soon as any moving components are not present any longer. As mentioned earlier, the configuration of a 120 volt electrical cable varies in many ways. For us today, the intended use of the cable under this listing is what we are concerned with. So again, by manufacturing RVs and utilizing the correct components in the proper manner, we as an industry avoid potential lawsuits. Liability can be shifted away from the RV manufacturer because everything was installed as intended, used for the correct application based on its listing and its intended use, and in all cases by following the installation instructions of all components installed in our RVs. Now, in this case, the marine or boat cable is a stranded type of Romex. However, it is not intended for repeated movement such as slide-out rooms and their connections. Marine cable is designed for fixed-in-place applications just as solid copper wire Romex is. The design of this cable is simply to make the installation of wiring easier in structures such as boats that have many irregular curved surfaces and not as movable and flexible as the SJ cable. It can be used for RVs for all fixed in place wiring situations, but it would be extremely expensive from the cable itself and the additional terminals for the conductors that would be necessary. The use of SJ-type cable at this point is the best alternative for moving parts like slide outs in an RV. So the takeaway from this group of slides is to pay attention to the listing's intended use and for any component being installed in an RV. Okay, moving on to the low volt electrical system. Section 4-2 of the ANSI RVIA 12 volt standard details the basic requirements for conductors to be used in recreational vehicles. The wire being installed in RVs again must meet certain standards with wire size, insulation, and temperature ratings that meet and are listed to SAE standards as seen below in the 4-2 types paragraph from the low volt standard. Importing wire from a new source or purchasing it because of a better pricing can be risky when it comes to getting truly listed wire. Again, as with the 120 volt wiring, listed wiring assures us in the 12 volt system that we have the correct circular mill area, which is basically the diameter of the wire, that it can carry the designed amp load along with the other considerations of proper insulation and temperature ratings. For those that have not read the 12 volt standard, please do so. It is a very small document and contains information that should be kept in the back of your mind while designing and or purchasing components for your company. 12 volt lighting today in most cases is pretty simple with the increased use of LED lighting. Most lighting needs to be listed if it is over 4 watts and used on an interior area of the RV, including exterior storage areas. Fixtures rated 4 watts or less, or lamps at 1.2 watts or less, need not be listed. However, in the past few years, the number of fixtures less than 4 watts that are being listed has increased dramatically. But again, I encourage all involved here today to read this 12 volt standard. There are several caveats to the low volt lighting installation that do require knowledge of fixtures, clearances, pigtail lengths, and others. So, in the 1192 chapter on fuel systems and equipment, chapter 5, and as mentioned earlier and circled here, reference 5.4.1 clearly mandates that fuel burning appliances and equipment be listed specifically for use in RVs. However, there are several individual code requirements that fall under 1192 that have nothing to do with listings. In this example, these picnic table portable units are not listed as suitable for use in RVs and will violate other codes related to fuel burning appliances. Now, we will not get into those details here or the reasons they would be cited as deviations today. Just be aware that both those in the purchasing and in the engineering should reference Chapter 5 of the 1192 or Chapter 2 of the 1195 handbooks on the PMRVs when considering any fuel burning appliances or equipment, and then compare the appropriate codes to their installations provided through the listing. The primary takeaway here is that there are many cooktops that are available on the market that are listed specifically for use in RVs. So only install or provide listed fuel burning equipment in all models that you produce that are intended and listed specifically for use in RVs. Those that do not clearly display an RVIA recognized listing mark along with the language stating that it's suitable for use in RVs, will not be acceptable and will be cited as deviations from the standard if found on the production line during an inspection. As with all listed components, fuel burning appliances and equipment are supplied with installation instructions and use instructions. The safe installation of these items is truly a safety concern and must be done correctly. My experience in the industry has shown that our manufacturing members do a good job of following the installation instruction requirements. Sure, there have been and will be the rare occasion when something is done incorrectly, but we must keep these mistakes to a minimum no matter how busy our production levels may be or how much employee turnover there may be at any given time. Between the installation instructions and the full understanding of Chapter 5 and fuel burning appliances and equipment, the purchasing and engineering departments can provide these components and others to the production line personnel for installation of the components that will be understood by all, installed to code and according to the installation instructions. For plumbing, there are several listing marks that you may be familiar with. IATMO, the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, is probably the most common. Second may be the National Sanitation Foundation. These, along with several other RVIA recognized listing agencies, provide plumbing component listings. As we discussed briefly at the beginning of the webinar, the majority of components in the plumbing system do need to be listed. The listing marks seen here are just a few of those markings. The markings will be displayed on the component in some manner. It may be embossed, printed, or through the use of a sticker containing the appropriate listing mark. So in addition to the listing, specific plumbing applications need to be recognized. Here we see DWV on this ABS pipe. Again, DWV indicates it is listed for use in drain, waste, and venting applications. As with any listed component in plumbing, the understanding and use of the installation instructions is very important. Here, a waterless trap is installed in one of several configurations allowed by the listing installation instructions. In this case, the installation instructions state that the ribs seen on the underside of this waterless trap be installed in that position when the trap is installed horizontally. This is just one simple example of installing this component according to its listed installation instructions. Now, there are three other issues that show up from time to time we cite as deviations from the standard. It's not like these plumbing components are poorly made. It is simply because they are not listed. Listings for all items are evaluations to a standard, and with sinks, as seen here, one point of evaluation is proper drainage. Sinks have several other requirements for their listing depending on the specific style and features of the sink. The point is, if they are not listed, they will be cited by our inspection staff. Here, we have a solid surface double basin sink that was constructed by the RV manufacturer. Now that can be okay, and we accept these solid surface sinks if they have been evaluated and listed by a third-party listing agency recognized by RVIA. The sink seen here can be purchased at any hardware store or Tractor Supply outlet. The problem is it's just a bucket that needs to be turned into a functioning sink. This obviously is not a listed plumbing component and not acceptable under the 1192 standard for RVs. To date, I have not seen one of our manufacturing members attempt to send this version of the bucket sink to be listed. I wonder why that is. Additionally, remember that if this is being done for that special order, and even if the bucket is supplied by the owner of this RV, if found during an inspection, it will be cited as a deviation from the standard. The last sink issue is concerning sinks that have the appearance of being listed. They have good finishes, they have the proper drainage, and from the sales department, they say it looks perfect and meets the design requirements of the kitchen or the bath area they are designing. But not being listed is often a function of the location in which it was manufactured. This being a sink with a copper hand-peened look seems to be very popular and has kept showing up over the years. These copper sinks look very professional and well built. But most that I have seen are not made in the United States and they are not listed. So when researching online to find sinks or any other plumbing component, make sure they meet the design requirements, but also always verify that they are listed. Statements like meets all requirements of NSF or IATMO standards does not indicate that the item is listed. It does not prove that it was even evaluated to a specific standard unless it is accompanied by a recognized listing mark. Just stating that it meets a specific standard is the equivalent to a CE mark to manufacturers here in the United States. And as discussed earlier, we as manufacturers in the United States do not self-certify our products. Independent third-party listing agencies provide that service. Now I would like to touch briefly on a few items in the Fire Life Safety chapter of the two standards. In either the 1192 or the 119.5, requirements are similar. When looking at listing requirements for smoke alarms, they are basically the same for both RVs and PMRVs. Here we see the RV standard 1192 requirements for smoke alarms. It requires the listing to be UL 217 or the Canadian equivalent. In the Park Model RV standard, we see the same requirements. Again, the UL 217 or the Canadian listing equivalent for smoke alarms is required. So for those purchasing agents that provide these detectors for both the RVs and the Park Model RVs, there is only one component to order for both. In most cases, engineering and production personnel will need to be the most familiar with the installation requirements for smoke detectors. Sales and purchasing should still be aware of the installation requirements simply to assure that they will work in the specific models of RVs they wish to install them in. Sales personnel are very well versed in the models they are selling, so when they understand the installation requirements of any product, it helps promote the coordination of all listed products downstream through engineering and production. Sales then can be the first line of defense in identifying the properly listed products and save time in purchasing and time in engineering during the design process. That will assure that the production facilities are supplied with a component that is properly vetted prior to arriving for production. In all cases, smoke alarms listed under UL 217 need to be marked with suitable for use in recreation vehicles on the unit. The suitables for RV statement may also be found within the installation instructions or packaging, but must be marked on the detector itself. Again, these labeling requirements are also needed to be marked on materials used on interior finishes. This generally can be the interior paneling material. It should be noted that in cutting panelings to the required sizes, not all smaller segments of the full sheet of paneling will have the required markings present as they were cut off to the panel's specific size. For any production personnel trying to verify that they are properly marked and labeled, look at the full panel found with the bundle they were delivered in. There you may find the required information. It will be printed on the back side of a full sheet of panel or on a sticker as seen here, or found on a label attached to the bundle of paneling. Use of interior materials must carry a 200 flame spread rating or less for all towable RVs under ASTM E84 or UL 723. This information is circled here on the label found on the back of a sheet of interior paneling. Remember, there are other standards that pertain to flame spread depending on the materials involved. For example, this could be wood finishes applied to cabinets and doors, or proper rating on fabric material used in tent campers. This information could be marked on the container of the cabinet finish or on the material itself, such as tent material, with a tag sewn into the fabric. Another example is paneling. It is not only the flame spread requirement, but now is also required to meet the CARB requirements for formaldehyde emissions that must be printed on the back of paneling as seen here. CARB, for those new to the industry, is the California Air Resource Board. The good thing is that currently the industry has worked through most of these issues. I have not seen paneling that isn't up to speed with these current requirements from CARB with labeling in some time, and for right now, we should be good. But don't go getting too comfortable. As an industry, we are constantly being brought new materials and from many different sources in different parts of the world. So always check for these flame spread requirements found in the 1192 standard for RVs under Chapter 6 and Chapter 3 of the A1195 standard on park models. Both are the fire life safety chapters. Another consideration is the types of glass or glazing installed in RV products. Here again, the glazing requirements are the same for the RVs under the 1192 standard as they are for park models under the A1195 standard. They both mandate that if glass or mirror have an area of 431 square inches or more, they must have safety glass or have a safety backing. The required marking on glass components of an RV detailing that it is safety glass can be etched into the glass, or it can have a safety backing with labels attached to the back, which is the case for most mirrors found in RVs. Okay, now to summarize this presentation, the sales and purchasing personnel lead this process and really should be well educated on the materials and equipment they are asking to be installed in our RV products. This includes knowing the installation requirements of the product listing. This will help everyone downstream in engineering and throughout the production process. Engineering will take the components and evaluate and, when possible, integrate them into the new model RVs. With the proper listings from purchasing in place, integration of the new components designed into the new model RVs, the coordination of these efforts is completed by the production facilities, building, the new model RVs. Now the production personnel and the quality control people at the plant do their part. The RVIA inspection staff, along with the line supervisors and the QA and QC personnel at the production facility, are now responsible for verification that the RVs being produced are meeting all of the requirements of the codes and standards. We, as RVIA inspectors, visit each member manufacturing facility 6 times a year and report our findings directly to the plant contacts that escort us on each of the inspections. If deviations are found, such as unlisted materials or components, that information will most likely find its way back up to engineering and purchasing for corrective measures to be taken. Finally, the Standards Department of RVIA follows up on a wide range of technical issues dealing with the codes and standards. This includes working with our RV manufacturers and vendors to correct technical issues the industry is experiencing. So, thanks for attending this presentation. Always feel free to contact the Standards Department and our RVIA inspection staff for any questions we may be able to help you with. After all, we are all on one team. Contact us when you have questions.